Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to the third lesson of our tutorial series on how to create a first-person controller using the new input system of Unity. Now, if you haven't seen any of the videos before this one, then I highly recommend starting this playlist at the beginning. In the last lesson, I showed you how to create the horizontal rotation of your player for the look mechanic. In this lesson, I want to teach you the second part, which is getting the vertical rotation of your camera. So here I have my project open, and the first thing that I'd like to do is demonstrate what I'll be showing you how to create in this lesson. So I'm going to click play. So here we have our first person controller in the scene view, and the game view is from the perspective of our first person camera. Now if I use the WASD keys, you can see how I can move my first person controller in the scene. Then if I use my mouse and I move it to the left, you can see how it rotates our first person controller in the scene. And the same thing goes if I move my mouse to the right. But now the mechanic that I've added for this lesson is the ability to move my mouse forward and have it rotate our camera up. And then if I move my mouse back or down, you can see how it rotates our camera down. And so now we have the ability to look around in every direction. Now one note that I'd like to mention about our look mechanic is the different objects that we're using when we rotate horizontally versus when we rotate vertically. When we rotate horizontally, we're rotating the first person controller itself. And this makes it so that we can walk forward in the direction that we're facing. Now when we do the vertical rotation, we don't want to rotate our first person controller. And the main reason for this is because if it weren't for gravity, then we'd essentially be able to fly around our scene. Now if we were making a first person controller for something like the Forge mode in Halo 3, then it would be perfectly fine to have the vertical rotation applied to our first person controller. Because in that game mode, you were essentially a little robot that flew around in the scene. But in this tutorial series, we're building a humanoid first-person controller, and so instead of applying the vertical rotation to our first-person controller, we want to apply that to our camera game object. And this will make it so that we can still look around in all directions, but that vertical rotation won't affect the direction that we move forward with our first-person controller. Now to create this game mechanic, we first want to go to our input actions window, which I have right here. Here you can see that I now have 3 actions instead of just 2. We have our move action, which uses the WASD keys, and then we have our mouse X action, which uses the horizontal movement of our mouse. We then have this new action, which is called mouse Y. And so to create this action, you're going to click on this plus sign next to actions. You can then give this action a name, so I'll just call this mouse Y2. You then need to select the empty binding, and over here where it says path, you're going to use this drop-down menu to go into Abstract Devices and then Mouse, and we want to select Delta Y. Now since I already have Mouse Y, I'm going to delete the duplicate. You then need to click on where it says Save Asset, and this will update our input control script with this new action. Now what we need to do is open up our first-person controller script, which I have right here. Now the vertical look mechanic is a little more complicated than the horizontal mechanic, and that's mostly because we need to limit the angle of rotation that we can do for the vertical look. Because we don't want to be able to keep rotating in the vertical direction and make it look like we're doing a bunch of backflips or anything like that. Now the first thing that we need to do in this script is create some new variables, but before we do that, I have this variable, which is a variable from our last video that I've renamed. It used to be called something like horizontal rotation speed, and I just changed it to horizontal sensitivity, because sensitivity is a term that we commonly use in gaming when referring to the speed of the look mechanic. And since I changed it here, I also changed it everywhere else it appears in this script. Now the first variable that we want to create for this lesson is another sensitivity variable, which I've called vertical sensitivity. This is of type float, and I've also made it a serialized field. The next variable that we need to create is a transform variable, which I've called camera transform. This is to hold the transform of our camera game object. The next 2 variables are of type float, and both of these are for constraining the angle of rotation for our camera. So the first one I've called min cam angle, and the second one I've called max cam angle. And the last variable that we need to create is another float, which I've called camera angle. And we can also go ahead and set this equal to 0. Now this variable is going to be for holding the current X rotation of our camera object. Now once you have these variables created, the next thing that we need to do is register this script to the new action events that we created. And so in the onEnable function, here I've typed input controls and then .fpController, which is our action map. And then I have .mousey, which is our action. I then call .performed, and then I use the += operator to register this new callback function, which I've called camera rotation axis Y. After this line of code, we need to call input controls.fpcontroller.mousey.enable. You can then copy these two lines of code and paste them into your onDisplay function. You'll then want to change the += operator to a -= operator, and then change the enable function to the disable function. Once you've done this, the last thing that we need to do is create this new callback function. So down here at the bottom, I have that function. It's a private void, camera rotation axis X, and then the parameter is input action.callbackContext, and I've called it context. Inside this function, the first thing that we need to do is access the camera angle variable, which holds the current X value of our camera game object's rotation. We're then going to use the += operator to either add on or subtract a value based on the Y movement of our mouse. And so right here, I'm using the context parameter .readValue, and then I'm looking for float to get that value sent over by the action based on the Y movement of our mouse. We then want to multiply this value by our vertical sensitivity, and then we're also going to multiply it by time.delta time to slow it down a bit. This is going to give us our new angle value that we can then apply to the X rotation of our camera game object. But before we do that, we need to set the bounds of this angle so that it doesn't just keep rotating. And so on the next line of code, I'm accessing our camera angle variable, and I'm setting it equal to mathf.clamp. I'm then passing in our camera angle as the first parameter. As the second parameter, I'm passing in the min cam angle variable, and for the third parameter, I'm passing in the max cam angle variable. Now mathf.clamp essentially just takes the value that we want to put bounds on, and it checks to see if it's inside those bounds, which we have right here. If it's inside those bounds, then it doesn't really do anything. But if it's outside those bounds, for example, if it's smaller than min cam angle, then it's going to return min cam angle. If it's greater than our max cam angle, then it will return our max cam angle. And so now that we've restricted the angle of rotation, we can then apply this value to our camera. And so on the last line of code, I have camera transform.local Euler angles, and then I'm setting it equal to a new vector 3. And for the X parameter, I'm passing in a negative camera angle. And the reason why I want to make this negative is because when you rotate an object down, that's actually positive, whereas when you rotate it up, that's negative. And so if we don't have this negative sign, then our controls will actually be inverted, which is actually an okay thing to do. We could even have a bool variable for if we want our controls to be inverted. And if it's true, then we could leave off the negative sign. For the second parameter, I'm just passing in a 0, and for the third parameter, I'm also passing in a 0. Once you have all of this, we can then save our script and go back to Unity. Inside Unity, we just need to set our new variables, and since I changed the name of our horizontal rotation speed variable, I also need to reset that. So I set that value to 2. For our vertical sensitivity, I set that value to 2 as well. For our camera transform, we need to grab the camera game object that's a child to our first person controller and drag it in there. And then for the min camera angle, I've set that to -89. And then for the max camera angle, I've set that to a +89. Now once we have all that, we can play our game and test it out. So here we have our player movement using WASD. I can move forward, I can move back, I can move left, I can move right. And then I also have my left rotation as I move my mouse to the left. I have my right rotation as I move my mouse to the right. And then I have looking up as I move my mouse forward, and I have looking down as I move my mouse back. Now you'll see that as I keep moving my mouse back, there's a limit to how far down my camera can rotate. And as I move my mouse up, and I keep trying to move my mouse up, there's a limit to how far up my camera will look. Now that's everything that we need for the basics of a first-person controller. You only need those 3 parts. You need the basic movement, you need the horizontal look, and the vertical look. Now at this point in time, I'm going to provide a downloadable package of this first-person controller on our website. So make sure that you check the description below this video. Now, if you enjoyed this video, make sure that you give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions, then leave them in the comments below or join our Discord server. And finally, make sure that you subscribe to this channel so you can get updates whenever we publish new videos. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.